Thank you for having me. Very excited to be here. My name is Craig Colarosi, and I am part of the private equity practice at Ontario Teachers Pension Plan. And private equity is notorious, particularly over the last few years, for being a highly manual enterprise architecture underlying private equity. And so we've been on a journey for a few years, and some of my teammates are here today, to modernize the enterprise architecture underlying our private equity practice. And the goal today is to share. So as we've moved through that journey, from putting in platform and data foundations to being completely disrupted by the LLMs and agentic architecture coming onto the scene, we wanted to share a few points through that journey with the hopes that they're helpful for this group today. And use a particular project that we're working on right now as a use case to focus in on around a virtual investment committee member that's in flight right now, which is super fun, and wanted to share that. So the parts of the discussion today will be really to talk about unstructured data, which is really characteristic in private equity, and proprietary data. And this is really one of our key learnings and one of the messages that we wanted to share today, which is your proprietary information is often where that secret sauce and that differentiated edge comes from. Much of everything else we feel like we're doing is really just about keeping up with competitors. But figuring out that secret sauce data that's unique to your institution and being able to unlock insight to make decisions for that data can lead to true differentiated edge. And so we wanted to talk through some of that. We've been on a journey to put in foundations and establish AI capabilities, including agentic architectures and accessibility to data. So we want to talk through that. And as I mentioned, our virtual IC member project, which I will share where we're at with that and what we've learned so far. So I wanted to start with a little bit about what do we mean by proprietary information and share what that means to us in the hopes that this group can think a little bit about what is your special secret sauce in terms of data and how you might bring that into decision making for your organization. So for us in private equity, where we zeroed in on was we started to focus on the investment decision making, which led to this notion of a virtual IC companion that would support decision makers in approving deals. And that particular decision for us is an extremely high stakes decision. So it's an executive level decision. We are making for a particular investment in a private company several $100 million decisions. And some of them are over $1 billion on one deal. So the stakes are super high, and the proprietary information that we started to realize where the value was and we wanted to try and bring it into that decision point was often our history of deal making. And so over the years, the debates we had, the discussions we had, the challenging of the bias in our investment committee meetings, the theses that were presented, this was our secret sauce. And all of this lived in PowerPoint decks. All of this lived in meeting minutes. It was everywhere. And so us realizing this is actually the edge that we're going after. How are we going to get our arms around aggregating this data and having a strategy around tapping into this information? And that led to, again, a strategy which we'll share of, okay, how do you, once you think through that, how do you bring that into the decision point for committee members and convince them that their 25 years of deal making and their intuition can be complemented by bringing our institutional knowledge and systematizing that and bringing that into the decision point in the discussion. How can that be creative and how can that be helpful? So the one question that we wanted to the group to keep in mind is again, for your organizations, where do you think that secret sauce is? Where do you think that institutional expertise lies? For us, it was very unstructured and hard to go and find and aggregate. For you, what might that mean and what might that look like? Now, before, I wanted to go back a little bit before we got to the cool, sexy stuff and the foundations that had to put in place to enable all that. And this is the hard work and that we've all been through, data modernizations, data architecture work, foundations that needed to be put in place. In the years of doing a multi-year data foundational work and having folks be patient, wait till you're done before you're unlocking insight, we all know are over. So AI has compressed the timelines and the appetite of boards and executives to apply AI and unlock insight has to be accelerated and has to be done incrementally while you're putting the foundations in place. And so for us, what that meant was, in a private equity context, we had to move from information flowing in from our portfolio companies in financial statement PDFs and board packs into our deal teams, and people were inputting and updating their Excel models. That was moving into PowerPoint, et cetera. And so we had to think through a business architecture and a business transformation when we went through this process. And so our vision was to move from that operating model to a platform and a data architecture model, even before the LLMs had burst onto the scenes. So those foundations of automated ingestion, core platforms, our firm had been already moving into a cloud-based architecture led by some of my teammates here with us today, was our strategy. And as we were moving through that work and putting in those platforms and moving into a cloud-based Snowflake architecture and thinking about how we were going to do analytics and self-service analytics, the LLMs burst onto the scene. People at all levels of the organization were asking a million questions that required integrated data sets underneath it, and the data architecture wasn't quite ready, and agentic architecture started to be generated through experimentation. And so we were really forced to pivot quickly around how can we think through enabling access through all these different ways now. And so it was beyond self-service analytics, but now you had agentic architectures and LLM-based chat capabilities at all levels. And so that had to be pivot quickly as we were going through that transformation, which I'm sure resonates with this group. So I wanted to talk about the project that was enabled by us making that pivot and adjusting our delivery strategy and our architectural strategy to enable some of the new things that were bursting onto the scenes. So the investment committee companion or agent was our focus. And so the interesting angle here that we're after, as I mentioned, which was to institutionalize our deal-making experience. And so we weren't reliant on who could remember what about the deal that we approved 3 years ago, but that was at our fingertips. And that was a complement to the deal team's experience. And so the thinking behind this system was that we were going to do more than just retrieve that information, but we wanted to synthesize it, and we wanted to design how the investment committee members were going to interact with this, not just in preparing for a meeting, but real time. And so we designed a solution that synthesized that institutional history into a set of suggested questions. And so, for example, so with the current deal, has a particular profile in a particular subsector or had risk-return characteristics around that deal, and the new deal that you're presenting has similar characteristics. And that happens to be quite comparable to a few deals that we've done in the past that haven't performed well. And we know they haven't performed well. So what makes this deal different? What makes us confident that the conditions around this deal and our thesis around executing on this deal or the value creation thesis is different? And bringing that context into that decision point meant collecting that history of discussions and debates around those historical deals, those original theses and assumptions that were presented on that deal, and combining that with our track record of performance if we had onboarded that deal. Bringing all that unstructured information with the structured information into the moment of investment committee decision making. And one of the things that we debated and are still debating and thinking through, and it came up yesterday and today, which resonated with me, which was, how are you measuring a better decision? And in this context, it's very difficult when we think about the performance of an asset as we've owned that asset and approved it, the track record of whether that asset is going to perform well is going to take years. And so are we making better investment decisions, and is that translating into better performance? Is going to take years. And even then, we have quite a small sample size for it to feel statistically significant. And so one of the things that we've started to do is really, aside from just adoption and usage as a signal that people are getting value out of a decision support system, is really just have a simple, low-friction way for them to gauge their conviction. How are they expressing their conviction when they make an investment decision on a deal? Which is quite simple. So it's an NPS style of feedback. But we really focus it on, how are you feeling about your conviction behind this deal? And are we feeling like we've asked a question that we wouldn't have otherwise without that decision support? Wanted to talk a little bit about our delivery strategy for this particular project, and there were a few components to that strategy. The incremental delivery and the high iteration for sure is going to resonate with this group, and I think that that feels like standard practice these days. The low friction continuous feedback was a key design principle. When we're dealing with senior executives making these level of high stake decisions, giving them very, very low friction, easy ways to give us feedback, engaging their conviction on making their decision, which is what we were really after. Designing the guardrails in has been a theme I've heard through the last couple of days, and so what that meant for us was aligning with our AI policy, aligning with our investment policies, aligning with our legal and compliance policies upfront, and designing upfront. Easy to say, harder to do. I know I've been hearing that from a lot of the speakers over the last few days. And one of the tactics that I've used in that in that respect is really just to bring a lead in from those supporting functions. And so having a compliance lead on the bus with us to have some accountability for designing those things in right up front. And wanted to talk a little bit about the architecture and our principles, not going too deep, but just thinking about some of the design principles that we used for this solution and that were important, and what were the value associated with those. So this particular solution, we really wanted to focus on reuse, and I'm sure this would also resonate with the group. We knew that because we had done so much work to modernizing the underlying data architecture and unstructured and structured data architecture underlying the solution, In this particular use case, even if it didn't get a ton of traction with executives, reuse of as much of the architecture as possible for additional investor use cases was a really critical design principle. And we were willing to make that trade-off and overbuild and take extra time to overbuild for that reuse and not succumb to that pressure that I'm sure everyone is feeling in this room to show value super fast and accelerate and over-design for a particular use case. So we really traded off reusability and leverage for the speed to show value and had to give ourselves some room with the executives on that. Flexibility and scale and observability. So the flexibility to pivot to different use cases was a core design principle. We knew that we were going to be moving into different decision-making forms and different levels of investments, so we wanted flexibility to tailor the prompt, tailor the style of the agents, and change the data scope into particularly for the unstructured data pipeline. Observability was key, and I've heard a lot of this over the last couple of days, so being able to track adoption, being able to track the performance of the system. The unstructured data pipeline quality was key, and cost. Cost, compute, and tokens, and having the FinOps around the architecture was key. In an investor environment, there's a keen eye on ROI for everything, and so these are some of our core design principles. A few other thoughts on, I won't go too much into our architecture here, but just to share a couple of the characteristics that I think were important that I think might be more useful. Like, so we're, in our environment, we're Microsoft stack, and so those choices are, we made all the natural choices that were compatible with that stack. MCP was one that came into play along the way as we were thinking through architecture, and so we thought about this as a two-way, I'll say, pattern, which was we wanted to be able to expose our data and our services to the organization, but vice versa. We wanted to be able to have our agents consume services and data through other third-party platforms. And so MCP was a key characteristic that we integrated into the architecture along the way. And it was two-way, exposing our data and services, and our agents consume from other data services and platforms. The observability around the cost and performance was critical. The RAG architecture and in our environment, the unstructured data was a heavy value driver. And so we had a heavy emphasis on the RAG and vectorizing all of that unstructured data and making sure that we had default patterns for how we went from blob to chunk to embeddings so that we didn't have to do too much upfront design work on designing embeddings, but to be able to just very quickly process that and then fine-tune it through the interaction with the system. So for this particular project, because we had designed for reuse, we're already sort of preparing to scale the platform and the system to other decision-making forums and bodies. And so, for example, at the investments level, we have a sort of a final, the buck stops here for deals. And we've already started to lay out strategies to scale it to individual asset class and individual team investment committee decision-making. And so that was key. The incremental expansion, so designing for reuse and then laying out roadmaps to scale incrementally was also a key part of our delivery strategy. So a few key messages that we wanted to share. Going back to the opening, which was really think about your secret sauce in terms of data. Think about what is unique to your institution and not just common to the subsector that you play in, but what is that institutional decision-making knowledge and context that lives in unstructured documentation and or in people's heads and meeting minutes and things like that, and how do you tap into that and translate it into decision support, and how does that create differentiated edge? Design for reuse, design for guardrails up front, and make sure that you're trading off that upfront investment in reusability, and don't succumb to that pressure to crank out those use cases and show value too early, and don't make that trade-off. I hope some of this was useful to the group, and happy to take any questions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Craig. So, questions?
Sorry, I'm just off to the side. I just had a quick question. I wanted to focus on your data storage RAG side of your solution. I've seen some recent promise shown in things such as graph RAG or knowledge graph RAG, and I was curious if that was something that you considered in your process of trying to distill that secret sauce and storing it in a semi-structured basis, or if what your decision-making process was around that of keeping it unstructured and just vector embeddings versus a semi-structured.
Yeah, there's a lot of options, you know, and sometimes we, like in this example, we debate options and then we choose a path, and then there's a bit of a learning curve as well with the architecture teams, and so the graph data pattern that you had mentioned was something that we debated. Even the RAG architecture was newer for us, and so we had gone down a path where we had several experiments and pilots that had that pattern, and so we wanted to leverage what had been done already, and so we already had a little bit of a lean and an axe towards that pattern. So it is difficult in that pivot between that there's always something like that flexibility and not overbuilding and over-designing, because the latest, like the pace of change of the new technology, whether it's a new pattern, like even MCP right now is going to go through so many different changes. So the temptation to standardize and make a standard pattern for the organization is tempting. So there's a balance there of giving yourself flexibility to pivot to the newer and latest and greatest patterns. So we did debate. You know, the RAG and vectorizing is working well for us still, and so we're leaning into that. And but recognize, to your point, that we need to stay flexible around how we're thinking about how we turn unstructured data into something that's consumable, because I hear these debates too, is like vector databases are dead, RAG's dead already, and so yeah.
Yeah, not even just that RAG is dead. I didn't want to be like, oh, that's bad. Just I was just curious on the thought process of that of considering it, but that answers my question. Thank you.
I think I saw a raised hand, but maybe I am just hallucinating. Any questions over here? Well, thank you so much, Craig. Thank you so much for your presentation and your insights. Thank you.
Thank you.
And it's 4 p.m. And I know that you were all maybe expecting Daniel to be here on stage, but you're stuck with me. I'm doing the closing ceremony today. So thank you so much for everybody who stayed until now and was able to just grasp all those ideas. I think I need a good sleep to process everything we talked about during the past 2 days. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the content. I really hope that you enjoyed networking with each other. That's the goal of conferences like these, especially when they're targeted to a specific domain. like finance, for example. So I'm not going to be here for long, and I'm not going to do the whole let's shake, shake, shake. It's the end of it, so thank you so much. I really hope you all filled out the forms. We will be seeing you in our next event, and we'll be taking all your comments into account. Thank you again, and have a great evening. Bye-bye, everybody. If anybody filled out the forms, like, can you just give them to me?